Hello, everybody. Welcome to an edition of the Masters Interviews, which, if you've not listened to this thread on the channel before, it's a really simple podcast-style chat with a leading light of historical wargaming. So what I like to do is find somebody who's got a bit more experience and has done more interesting stuff so far in their wargaming career than me, and pick their brains a little bit. And we've had some cracking guests on. We've not done one of these, though, for a couple of months. So I'm delighted to be back doing them with Colin Ashton, who you may have heard the name. And if you've not heard the name, you will have certainly seen the blog or seen pictures from the blog, which is called Carrying On Up the Dale. Which is, if you're starting to Google wargaming or look at particular layouts, or you're researching how to do particular battles, it's almost impossible not to have at least come across a photograph from the Carrying On Up the Dale blog. And the person behind that is Colin. Good evening, Colin.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, melting slightly, but yeah.
Is it very warm up there? Because Colin lives in. Where are you in the United Kingdom, Colin? Tell the internet.
On Teesside,
which is northeast of England.
Middlesbrough. Yeah, Middlesbrough. Yeah.
Yeah. So Colin is very, very well known in that part of England for his wargaming and his blog. And we'll start off by talking to him a little bit for people who may know of you but not know much about you, Colin. Your history in historicals goes back an awfully long way. So could you just give us a really brief overview of how it started and take us on to how it's going?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, like everyone of my generation, it was sort of constant exposure to war films and airfix soldiers and airfix kits that kind of got me going. Then when I was in secondary school, there was a small group of us who were sort of like-minded in terms of gaming. We weren't particularly well organised or anything, but there was actually a war game shop in St Anne's-on-Sea where I was brought up, and the proprietor of the shop allowed us to use his collection of thousands of painted Hinton Hunt Napoleonic figures on the bare floorboards of the second story of the building.
Wow.
And so we got well into it there, throwing in very much kids and sweet shops and everything. Hundreds of figures, and trusted us with them as well. And and so that I could never afford anything beyond half a dozen of this and one of those. It was very much a matter of I had no money, obviously being a young teenager, and we didn't have creative means of making money in those days, like they do today, perhaps. So then moved to Durham and joined the Durham Wargames Club in 1972, and with the odd sort of hiatus over the intervening years, I've been a member ever since. So, or at least attending when I didn't. There were times when I didn't go, but by and large, on and off over the last sort of whatever that is, 40 odd years. And it's just grown from there.
You mentioned of your generation, just so people know. What rough age bracket is that, just out of interest?
63.
63.
I know I don't look it.
Yeah, if you won't be able to see Colin, but he's got a fantastic shirt on. Which is, are they tigers?
Yes.
He does look like he's about to order a Hawaiian cocktail. I'm very jealous, which is like not very in keeping with the northeast weather. So tell us a bit about because the YouTube channel is being run by me is and looking at the demographics, it's a little bit younger than that, and we on the channel I like to sort of get the questions answered of a starter in historical wargaming, if you like. Mm-hmm. Because there are some of us out there. So I started in my mid-30s. I'm now in my very late 30s. And I'm always sort of fascinated by people of your generation who have got to where you are now with a huge collection and a really impressive sort of setup. And the story you just told about Airfix and having, as a young person, having a venue to go to, the shop, where there's a kind of games room of sorts, an informal one. We don't really, from a historical point of view, anyway, we don't really have that now. So how do you see sort of recruitment in the hobby kind of happening at the moment versus how you got into it?
That's a really difficult question, and one that there are probably as many answers as there are people that could answer it. I think that if it wasn't for the likes of COVID, the only way that I've ever seen sort of younger people come into the hobby is through exposure at wargames events, friends of friends, sons, nephews, relatives, mates. I've yet to meet anyone that's said, "Oh, I want to be a wargamer," and gone to a club. Although I'm sure there are. I just and I think obviously the big draw and the big attraction to the younger people these days are the Games Workshop type games, and the sort of boutique type games that it's possible to get a small collection and play the game without having to break the bank, so to speak.
Sure, because if you've not seen Colin's blog, carrying on up the Dale, go away and Google it and see some fascinating stuff. Because where Colin is now from those beginnings is quite a spectacular, bespoke, built wargames room, I think, isn't it, Colin?
It is, yeah. I mean, I'm very lucky. I'm very fortunate that I've got a very, very understanding wife. We originally lived up the Dale, hence the name Carrying Up the Dale. We moved back into civilization a few years ago. Now, I had a games room in our old house, and I then converted the garage into a games room, but it never seemed to be big enough. And so when we were thinking of moving, the deal breaker was, well, I want a new games room and it needs to be bigger. In the end, we ended up essentially buying my mother-in-law's house and having it completely rebuilt because it was in need of a lot of work and attention. And I had the opportunity to say, well, we can tag a games room on the back here, and it can be my own man cave. And so it was essentially 23-foot by 15-foot room where just jutting out the back of the house.
Which if
not big enough now.
Still not big enough.
No.
if you look on the blog, I mean, typically you'll see some quite spectacular setups, which are, you'll see some pictures that just keep going round and round. Really, people like to share links to of huge games. I mean, give us an overview of something you've done recently, Colin, that was of a particular size that you were happy with that went well.
Yeah, well, last year, the first year of lockdown, I put together a very large, too large possibly, collection of early Italian wars. And so then proceeded to put on some very, very big games, with the added complication that we were doing them remotely using live streaming and Skype for the audios. Prior to that, every other Saturday, I would be hosting a large game of some description or other from one of the collections, ranging from the Italian Wars, 30 Years' War, everything right up until the mid to late 19th century. just depending on what I felt like doing at the time. But I mean, it's difficult to put a finger on anything in particular that's particularly big, because everything I've got a big table and I fill the table without overcrowding it completely, and ensure that when people come round, half a dozen people or so, that a good time is had by all, which is the primary objective really. To get, because I'm not going to be able to move all my little men around the table myself. It's incredibly boring doing that. But having other people play is particularly it's particularly good, and it gets them used really. Because I mean, the gaming side isn't always the main driver for me, not these days anyway. So it's kind of, I like doing big games.
The social side of it has taken over a little bit.
Socially it's important. Yeah, I mean, when I used to go to the club in my younger days, I would always often put games on with my stuff that people could take part in, and then once I had my own games room at home, always inviting people up for games, to the point where I wouldn't go to the club because I didn't need to really. And now I can't really get to the club under my own steam because of my sort of various issues. It's great that I've got a lot of friends who are very happy to come and play here. And I mean, that includes I've got a mate in Falkirk who's been down a few times, friend in Stroud, East Yorkshire on the coast, Grimsby area, even Adelaide, friend in Adelaide. Didn't come specially, but he organised a holiday.
But he dropped in around.
He organised a holiday,
paying you a visit
around a game here. Yeah, so
fantastic.
so it's good that I've got. In fact, and I think Tim and Barry are coming up at some point in the next few weeks for a game as well. So yeah, it's very much a social side and using the facilities that I've got. I mean, I'm very, very lucky, and I don't say anything else other than the fact that I'm very fortunate that because of the circumstances that I'm in and the sort of cards I've been dealt, that I've got a fantastic setup, and I've got lots of collections and lots of books, and still got lots of motivation.
How many years have you pretty much continuously been wargaming then? Because if you started as a youngster, without assuming you've maybe had one or two smallish breaks like people do, I mean, how many? Yeah, well, all the way through,
well, in some way or other, yes. Because even when I wasn't able to go to the club or work got in the way, I would still read, I would still research, I would still buy stuff, and I would quite often my job took me away from home a lot of the time, and rather than sit in the bar, I would get room service and paint some figures.
Sit and paint,
yeah. And that was one way of getting through it, really, because it can be quite soulless if you're every other week you're away all week with a different bunch of people, and you've got no choice about who you're with, really. But and you don't really want to spend. Well, perhaps some people do, but didn't always want to spend several hours in the bar getting too hammered, really, to do an effective job the following day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I once did that on holiday. So I took a small box of paints and plastic figures, some Wars and Roses figures. And once our kids were in bed a couple of nights, I got these paints out while the wife was reading and started to paint. It got a bit of a strange look, but
Yeah.
Interesting.
But I just like big projects, and I like the end result to look dramatic. Basically, so I tend not to do things by halves.
No, I mean the collections you've got, which I think span pretty much any era you could think of. I think, but do they are they all painted by you?
Not all of them, no.
The majority.
The earlier one. Oh, the vast majority are, yes. Probably less so in recent years because I've just not been physically able to paint as much as I used to, but I still get through an awful lot of figures myself. It's just that sometimes, as we all do, you sort of hit a wall and you want to move on to something else, and so it's find somebody else to do them, or you need to kickstart the project, and so get someone to kickstart it by doing them. Yeah. But certainly the vast majority of the figures I've painted and based myself. Even things I bought off eBay, I've normally end up repainting them,
redone them
to some degree, and rebasing them and everything. So at least if the painting style may not be quite the same, the basing is the same.
Sure. And have you, so say, I mean, if you look at some of the photographs on the blog and reading some of your battle reports and things, it looks like some of the games, there are many, many thousands of figures in some cases. So how do you approach a collection or a project? Are we talking, is batch painting the way you do things? Or
yeah, absolutely, yes.
Yeah?
I mean, I've currently got my very untidy paint station, which I'm not showing anyone, is littered with about 5 or 6 different periods worth of figures. And there's probably about 7 or 8 units within that pile as well. And I just cherry pick between them during the course of the period of time that I give myself to paint. And then all of a sudden, there's an awful lot of figures ready. So sometimes, I'll get maybe 100 or so figures finished in a week, but they weren't started that week, but they've all got the boots polished and ready to march off to the boxes, or the barracks, so to speak. So production-wise, it's quite totally disorganized, basically, I think is the best way to describe it. Complete chaos.
It just goes to show that you can achieve quite a lot with chaos.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, I have no plans. I mean, if you take a typical sort of project.
Have you always worked like that? Is that how you've always done it? Or is it something that you've done?
Yeah, I've
gone for it.
I've never in my hobbies, I've never been particularly well organised. That's through choice. Yeah. Through choice.
Yeah.
Because I had to be organised in work and life and everything. So there's no need to be organised. So if I was wanting to build another army, for example, I'm just in the middle of putting the finishing touches to Goths and late Romans. Yeah. I had no plans for what I wanted other than, I like those figures, I'll order some of those. I didn't realise they did some. Order some of those. Griffin Beast, of course, do plastics, and so I bought a shed load of those. And I'll probably have as many figures left unpainted as I've got painted.
Yeah.
When the time comes to move on to something else.
Yeah.
And the collection is pretty enormous already. So there's no rhyme or reason. There's no plan. I know some people will sit down with a book and write down exactly what it is they want, keep a record of what they painted every week. I just find that not me.
Yeah.
It's not me at all.
This is really interesting because that is me. That is what I do. And I'm always quite jealous of people, I suppose, that can get stuff done even when they've not planned. So they've got no sort of set sort of timeline or list that they're working to, or I'm going to do this by this. Which people like yourself, essentially, I'm always a bit like, I don't know. I think a lot of it, a lot of these different styles is I don't think there's any right or wrong way of going about the hobby and going about these projects. I think that it's whatever works for you mentally, because the first thing that I noticed as a 35-year-old 5 years ago or 4 years ago, whatever, was when I was getting interested in historical wargaming was this isn't something that you could buy a load of stuff on the Friday, build it on the Saturday, paint it on the Sunday, play on the Monday, not in any real numbers. It was something, it becomes obvious to beginners that this is a long-term thing. Like you're in the long haul. You're in it for many weeks at least before you get a game on, maybe months, if you're a game of any size. So I think that different people approach that challenge of time differently. So my way of motivating myself is to have a plan and to work to the plan, and that helps me to keep on track and to keep going. Whereas other people seem to get the enjoyment out of the sort of fluidity and, like you say, the sort of the chaos of moving from one thing to the next and chopping and changing what you're doing. Is that do you find that that's your best way of getting things done?
Absolutely.
Not be organised. Yeah, the irony.
I mean, it might actually be a very disorganised way of being organised. I don't know, but I know what I'm doing.
I might be saying it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what I'm doing. Nobody else does, and I know in my head that I made a rash comment on Facebook, I think last week, that this week I'm going to finish these 44 Goth cavalry and have them done by Sunday. I didn't even finish one unit, let alone 6 units, because it was too sunny to sit indoors painting. And so I just did other things instead. But it's just, I like, if point A is having the spark and the idea, and point Z is getting them on the table for the very first time and having a game, then I like A to Z to take as little time as possible, basically. And I do that best by just... You're making me feel seasick now with all that moving.
Sorry. If people that can't see, I'm moving around because I've got a cat that wants to leave the room. So I'm just moving to let the cat out.
Yeah. So yeah, it works for me. It always has done, and I can't say anymore. It probably doesn't work for everyone. It certainly probably doesn't work for many people, but I just find that it suits my sort of mentality. And because I give myself like 3 or 4 half-an-hour sessions of painting maximum every day, then I can just dip in and out and do what I feel like, basically.
Were things different when you were balancing working with hobbying?
Absolutely.
We're now retired, you should say.
Yes.
So what was different when you were trying to hobby while while having a job?
Well, it was the usual thing, really. I had, when I was young and working, I had lots of enthusiasm and no money, so no connection. And then as you move your way up the ladder, so to speak, and the career develops, you end up with plenty of money, but no time. And there was always an element of juggling the two for a long, long time. But certainly the bulk of my collection didn't exist. How old was my daughter? 25 years ago.
Wow.
I collected, everything was 15 mil and 6 mil prior to that point. But then I made the sort of quantum leap type decision that I'm going to go to 28s. And I'm possibly ashamed to say that I was really into Warhammer Fantasy for quite a while.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
A lot of people have done that.
Yeah. Not when you're in your 40s and 50s, though.
I guess. Well, I guess. I mean, it's interesting.
My mate.
Go on. Sorry.
My mates that I was playing with at the time, they were into it as well. So it was
so it made sense
of maintaining sort of contact. Yeah, but they've all gone now, and and so now it's all historical stuff in 28 mil. And I'm in a position at the moment, thankfully, where I've got the time, and I've been able to build up a collection. And I needn't buy another figure until the day I die. If I die like in my 90s. Because I've got so much to paint.
You've got so much to do, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like that when I look at it. It's quite depressing sometimes, and it's quite, oh my God, I'm never going to get these done. I might as well just sell them, and then I'll decide, no, I won't, because you just never know. I might need those.
You might need them, yeah.
And you can never have too much of something you don't need.
Yeah, that's interesting as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. Yeah, because that's
chaos
again,
rule.
again, that is the exact opposite to me. So I have a rule where I never ever buy more than I think I can paint in the next 30 days.
Right.
Because I suppose again it helps me with that complete opposite way that you do things, where I've got a target to go for this month, for next month, and I'm trying to do this project and this one project and this one and only project, and I won't do anything else until I finish this project. So it helps me mentally to keep the lead mounted or the plastic mounted, whatever you want to call it, to keep it manageable. I think it's
more of a zit rather than a mountain.
Exactly. Yeah, it's tiny. Yeah, it's literally about. I've literally got about 50 unpainted figures, and that's it. And I'll buy more as soon as they're done. Though I'll buy more.
Yeah.
Which I know does not make sense if you're, and I will have to change that policy at some point, because I'm about to start English Civil War, and I've made a decision that I'm going to go big on it. So it doesn't really make sense to buy 2,000 figures or 1,000 figures in tiny bits. There's going to need to be a bulk buy unless I want to spend like 30% more.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get an army deal at some point.
Yeah, exactly. You get a good deal off someone if you buy them all from them. I mean, that's what I always look out for, the sales.
Yeah, I am going to have to do that.
And
it's a policy that will have to get abandoned.
Yeah. As you get older, of course, you'll find that you'll have more time on your hands.
Yeah.
Children have left home.
Yes, yeah. Which I've got two at the moment. They've got. I've got an 8-year-old and a nearly 4-year-old. And I'm obviously not wishing them to grow up. It's brilliant. They are brilliant. I love them to bits, and it's fantastic having young kids because they're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
They don't mix with wargaming that well.
Well, I don't know. When my daughter
very
was
young.
When my daughter was 5 or 6, maybe not even that, she would come up into where I was painting and everything, and I would exploit her mercilessly and give her a job to help me do the basing. So it would be like 10p a base. I'd put the PVA on, and she'd put it in the sand or the budgie grid. Yeah. And so, and were she to come round tomorrow and do the same job, she'd still get 10p a base. Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah, and then my son has shown sort of bursts of interest, and he paints. He likes Space Marines just because they're easy to paint and they appeal to him. So he's got a few. He's started painting, and sometimes we've probably about once a fortnight we'll actually be sat at the same desk.
Yeah,
which is nice. That is nice. Now he's getting that little bit older. That is really nice. Oh. So with such a long career, if you like, in historicals, I suppose, and having started very young and maintained it pretty much, all the way through. I mean, same question I ask of everybody: like, what do you get out of it? Like, why do you do it?
I just get a bit of a challenge, stimulation. I'm always interested in things I don't know anything about. That makes sense in terms of history. I actually enjoy painting, and I enjoy the end result. And there's a megalomaniac in all of us, really, when it comes to laying out the latest army on the table and thinking, "Oh, that's big." Yeah. But yeah, it's just I think just from it's a hobby, therefore there's an assumption that it's something that you choose to do and that you enjoy doing, which is certainly the case with me. If I didn't, I would have stopped a long time ago. And I think I'm just fortunate that I've got the resources and the time to do as much or as little as I want. I've always been able to make do with what I've got and adapt, so to speak, in terms of reading or what I'm going to paint. Just it's just about it's me, and it keeps me going. Basically, it's very little to do with anybody else other than the fact that I might be in the same house. You know, it's what I do to get me through the day sometimes, and it has been for a long, long time.
Yeah, because we should explain to people that you, I think, had a period of ill health, which has led to you having a disability, I think, or being registered disabled. Is that right? So you have a back problem, which if you could just give us an overview of how that impacted you, because my understanding of it is that it was pretty serious and pretty intense at one point, and it affected you.
To ignoring the gory details, essentially, I've got the degenerative condition in my lower back, and surgery was required. Surgery didn't work, so it's a matter of walking is very painful. Not walking is painful. Sitting is painful. Standing, everything's painful. So it's just a matter of I can't do anything that I used to do in terms of active hobbies, and so it's been a complete change in terms of the way I've sort of tackled life and the universe and everything, really. And I just think, well, this is the way it is, and make the best of it. But it does have an impact, obviously, in terms of sort of motivation. Depression, mental health, that kind of stuff. When you're on, I don't speak alone. I know a lot of people that suffer from sort of chronic illnesses, and you just get on with it. You've just got to the point where you physically or mentally can't, because you come to the point where you are unable to do anything. But it's just got to keep going, got to crack on, as they would, as you'd say, really. But it did have an impact. But it was something that I could overcome.
Did it affect your ability to hobby at one point? Or
yeah. I mean, even now, if I run a game, then I'm pretty much wrecked afterwards. So, but it's worth it, otherwise I wouldn't do it. It's like, sticking knitting needles in your eye, it hurts at the time, but I mean, it's probably worth it if someone likes it. But it's the end result is that there's it's something that I will probably say that I've got a serious compulsive disorder relating to wargaming and collecting little men, of which I've got too many, and buying books and hoping to get to the postman first when he delivers yet another parcel, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's not wishing to lay on thick anything relating to the fact that I've got I'm not fully able. You just make the best of it, really. That's all I can do. As I say, the positive thing of having serious back surgery that didn't go particularly well was that I got to retire 8 years early. So, I mean, there's got to be that's the good thing. So I'd still be working now if it wasn't for.
Really?
I'd have another 3 years to go.
You'd still be going,
yeah. So that is not something I would particularly enjoy the thought of.
No. And sort of adversely, when you were able to get back at it a little bit after surgery and things, because having retired early, your previous job had a reasonable amount of you're a reasonably sort of high-ranking civil servant with a reasonable amount of responsibility. Yeah.
Responsible, yeah. Wasn't high-ranking, but responsible, yeah.
Responsible citizens.
Yeah.
Did you? We spoke a little bit before we started recording about how, number one, you had the problem with your back and the fact that the surgery did not go well, and that you would need to retire early, and that although that would bring positives in terms of time, you suddenly went from having all that responsibility in your work life to not having that. And you use wargaming to fill that and to overcome the mental challenge of that. Is that a fair?
Absolutely right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I was able to allow myself to immerse myself in the hobby far more than I'd ever been able to do before, and probably enjoyed it far more than I've ever done before. Yeah. Well, it's almost like a full-time experience now. It's it's like a I don't know. It's like I get up and I'll do something wargaming wise during the day, and then whatever else we might do during the day. I've always got my man cave to escape to and do stuff in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's thoroughly I thoroughly enjoy the hobby, and I certainly enjoy it more now probably than I ever did. And it was that major, enormous hurdle that I had to. Well, I couldn't leap over it. I had to find a way through it. That led me to where I am today, in terms of being able to enjoy the hobby and possibly, put a bit back into it, really.
And does the do you think that the kind of combination of wargaming and sort of coping with pressure, does that what am I trying to say? Do you think there's something in that? Because that's what I often find is when I first started, I noticed a trend pretty quickly that your average historical wargamer, typically, it was quite common for them to have held jobs where they've got a reasonable amount of responsibility and pressure, and it might be reasonably complicated. It might be a reasonably complicated job. It's often jobs where they're in charge of people, or they're in charge of something important. And where they have to deliver, basically. So, like yourself, I realised quite quickly there's a lot of civil servants. There's a lot of people who are a couple of people that I've met that are army officers.
Yes.
There are other people I've met who are. I've had a couple of lawyers. I'm not the only journalist that I've met who's into it. So I'm just curious what your take is on that. Having
I think it's just it's a release, really, isn't it? It's escape. It's an escape. I mean, yeah, you might have a sort of a relatively high-powered, very pressurized, target-driven, performance-orientated job, but then everything that those things are, they're certainly not when it comes to wargaming or anything related to it, really. I think it possibly tends to be almost the flip side of where, and I don't mean this in any way other than an observation, that over the years, there's perhaps been an inverse relationship between people that want to run a war games club because it's the only thing they'll ever get to run.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other people, it's a good job it's not a video, and the other people are don't really care. They just do it because they do it.
Yeah.
And it's not important from an ego point of view, because we've all got to the as far up the greasy pole as we've been able to or wanted to. And I've had to tell people to do stuff and work to targets, but now we don't have to. So we don't.
Yeah. That's the other thing
that I've told them to do.
Yeah, of course, naturally.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing I've noticed as well is that there was there's an expectation in my mind that it's interesting that you say that, because there's an expectation in my mind when I was thinking about starting a collection and thinking about trying to find a club or a group or something, trying to find somebody else, to play games with, basically. I suppose I did have that stereotype in my head that the people who I might meet would be unusual or would be overly obsessive with their interpretation of the rules and detail of the rules. And I find that those people are very, very much the minority. I've been really pleased to find that 99% of the people that I've met are really quite reasonable and relaxed about the actual act of the game.
Yeah, that's possibly the case nowadays, but I don't think in my experience that wasn't always the case. I mean, it was just.
Do you think something has changed, or?
Yeah, they've all been knocked on the head and buried under patios. No, I think that it's just people get older, and I'm sure those people are still there, but they're not in a majority anymore. And they may never have been in a majority. They were just sort of noisy about it, and they were the sort of people that you wouldn't really want to be playing against, because they would play the rules rather than the game, and they would play the rules and the game rather than the period. What the point? I mean, which is something that's one of the rules when you come to my house is that you play the period, and anything gamey will be penalised by the umpire. So. Yeah, I mean, you get the stereotypical sort of 50-year-old guy with a rucksack welded to his back who still lives with his mum and has never seen a bar of soap for the last 20 years, that sort of managed to batter the way through the crowds at wargames events and everything. Those still exist, but it's just not important anymore. Whereas, when I was younger, it wasn't, they seemed to be something that was annoying and therefore took up far too much time than they actually deserved. Whereas these days, it's not the case.
This might be a bit of an assumption, or it might be wrong. It's just a guess, but it seems to me that there was an era when competitive historical wargaming was more common. And that now doesn't seem to. That seems to be a rarity, really.
I don't know whether it's a rarity. I mean, I never been involved in it at all. So I mean, I used to play games with my friends regularly. Every week. We'd play an ancient game with some of the guys round at the houses and everything. But it was just about whether we win, and it was about who was going to win. But there was never nobody in my circle of friends ever was involved in sort of competition gaming to any degree. There were one or two that were in the Society of Ancients, and they sort of did their kind of league thing. One or two more that might have done things like DBM and DBA and all that stuff, which I've never played at all, so I can't pass comment on. But I just don't, and I'm aware that sometimes there are competitions happening on the back of shows like the one in York, I think, and occasionally it had been maybe when Triples was on at Sheffield. But just don't see it. I don't see it. I'm not aware of it. I'm sure it still goes on. I mean, my only claim to fame is that in 1973 or something, I was in the final of the National Western Gunfight Championship.
There's a claim to fame.
Using the sort of 54mm Britain's figures,
Oh wow! Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and which was just And now these days, I look disparagingly on skirmish games with less than 500 figures. Then in those days, I was sort of moving my little sort of bang of Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday around in a skirmish. But it was it was what it was. But I have I can't really comment on the sort of extent of the sort of competition games in the historical niche carry on now.
No, I just find it interesting because I've not yet met anybody who does it for that reason. If you know what I mean. I'd be interested to know like what they. Not this isn't me attacking competitive historical wargame, by the way. This isn't meant to be a hatchet for anybody that's listening. I've never actually met anybody who's really serious about winning an organised event. So just
neither have I.
So I'm curious to know how that evolved and what they get out of it, I suppose, just out of curiosity. Cool. Another thing I wanted to ask you was just going down the route of building collections again. And the march of the, I suppose you might call it the great variety now of manufacturers and materials that figures are made out of versus what maybe there were 20, 30 years ago. And I'm curious to know, because going back decades, assuming the majority of your collection would be metal, and previously you mentioned, the Gripping Beast plastics. So when that started to come to the fore, 20 years ago or so, how did you approach that? And as a long-standing sort of builder of large collections, what was that like? And what's your view of plastic?
Yeah, I mean, the various different mediums that you can get buy your figures in. I've been almost entirely metal over the years, apart from my diversion into Warhammer Fantasy, which prepared me for the joys of sticking my fingers to each other, and while I was trying to stick together some sort of skeleton horde or a zombie or something. And I was always appealed by found the idea of the Gripping Beast and Victrix and Perry plastics when they first started emerging, and thought they were a good idea. And I did get some, and I have bought more and more and more, and they're fine. They meet a need for me in terms of getting an awful lot of money, a lot of figures for a lot less money than you would if you were buying metals. And I think there's a lot to be said for mixing metal, plastic, whatever it is you need, whatever it is you want to do. I mean, I'm really looking forward to when Wargames Atlantic bring out the late Romans and the Goths, and I believe possibly even Sassanids in the future. I mean, having just finished a late Roman and Gothic army, of course, I hate them, but I think it's brilliant the fact that they're doing that. And I was tempted at one point to go for Republican Romans and Carthaginians because I used to have those in metal thousands of years ago. But I thought no, so I have stuck with primarily metal, to be fair, but where there's a need for me and someone provides it, then I'm quite happy to go with the plastics. And thankfully these days, the better of them, the better manufacturers keep the number of pieces down to a bare minimum. If you think of the old Warhammer plastic box sets where there might be like 97 pieces for one single figure.
I've seen some terrifying. I've never actually owned any. I've seen some terrifying skeletons. It's almost like you got to piece together a skeleton in.
I think there was lots of bits. And these days, I've got some warlord Crimean War Russians to do, and that's basically a head and a body. That's all you need.
Stick it on
like an army builder. And then undercoat them, and then contrast paint them, and they'll be done in no time. I said about 4 years ago, and they're still in the box. But I think that for me, plastics have been a great way forward, and it ought to kind of open open the doors from a financial point of view to
They do.
younger people or people without as much disposable income. Not that I've got a lot, but
Yeah. I just find that they're easier for me to justify, on a household budget which has got children in it and still got a mortgage,
yes,
so on and so forth. It's not that there's no disposable income. It's just that I need X amount of metals, so that'll be X amount of hundreds of pounds. It's just not going to happen at the moment. So, but I need a box of 40 Perry miniatures, which is going to be 20 quid. Much easier conversation. Yeah.
So you're gonna struggle then when you get your 25 mil, 28 mil, your Civil War metal army out, aren't you?
You are, yeah. Which is why which, for example, at the minute, I'm really this is where I could do with your advice. Is where I've got this. I've settled on this ambition, I suppose you'd say. I suppose a lot of things. You get to a point where it's like, well, what kind of historical wargamer are you? Like, what kind of hobbyist are you? And I've moved on pretty quickly from thinking, well, I'll have one or two big collections, but I'll probably have lots of small collections that I'll play skirmish games with. That's something that I gave up on a while ago, and I've settled on. I'm going to build big collections. And I've just completed a Wars of the Roses collection that'll top out. It'll finish at about 600-700 figures, and it'll grow again in future. But for now, I'm saying that's finished.
There's enough there,
yeah. Which is you can get two reasonable sized armies, and I'll build it up. So eventually there'll be about 500-600 aside one day. But for now, that's a completed collection of sorts. But I've made the decision that I'm going to go English Civil War, and I'm going to go big. So meaning I'll go with two forces. So we'll go one royalist, one parliamentarian, obviously, and I want to push way past the 500 figures aside reasonably quickly. And I can't see a way of doing that without involving the famous Warlord plastics. And mix and matching other manufacturers in there as well, because the other thing I've noticed actually for people that are just getting into it and wondering, well, how much does a metal figure cost? Because it's pretty obvious what a plastic figure costs. The answer is they're somewhere around just over £1 each normally, is what a plastic figure works out as. So it's reasonably easy to say how much a plastic army is going to cost. If you're going to buy 200 plastic figures, they're going to be about 200 quid, maybe 250. But if you're going to buy 300 metal figures, the question, how much will that cost, is not actually easy to answer, because I've noticed there's big differences actually between someone like Perry and Foundry and Old Glory and Vicor in ECW. There's big difference in price. So what's your view of how to tackle a period that has a minority of plastic but a majority of metal? Would you, if you were starting out with a budget, would you go high on plastic, low on metal, or what would you try to do?
Yeah, in fact, I did. I have they've not seen the light of day for a long time, but I do have 30 years war collection, Swedes and Imperialists come Catholic League, and they were initially entirely plastic. So there were.
Wow.
I currently have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe a dozen or so Imperial tertio type units, which have got about 20, 30, 40, 50 or so figures in each, and about the same number of Swedish and the like units, slightly smaller, and they're all plastic. Because
which manufacturer are they?
They're Warlord.
Warlord, yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much the only people that seem to do plastic for that era, actually, as far as I can work out.
Yeah. I mean, they're not ideal. They're not perfect, but they do the trick. And you stick the appropriate flags on, and play the tactics of the 30 Years' War rather than English Civil War, and it's as good as anything really. And they're my toys, so I do what I like with them. the but and you could even do that with the cavalry as well, because I mean they produced the Swedish cavalry and the cuirassiers and everything, and so you could get a really good. I did get a really good, massive chunk of the collection was plastic. I've since then, through being a terrible 3 o'clock in the morning eBay person, managed to get quite a few metals as well to sort of bolster up the units, and also particularly figures from TAG, from the assault group, who do a fantastic range of 30 Years War figures,
right?
In my opinion, anyway. And I think it's Curtis. Is it First Corps or something? Or Curtis? They do a good one as well. And they mix in very nicely with the plastics, even within the same unit, let alone a unit of this and a unit of that. So it's just grown from there. But even now, 75% of both of either army are plastic.
Really?
Yeah.
Which must be because pretty much all of it, which must be Warlord then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've got a unit of figures from some guy in Czechoslovakia who are and they're rather nice, a bit quirky, but just thought, I'll have one of those. And then I've got probably a unit from most people that manufacturers that make them.
Really? Which is actually that period. There are a lot.
Just because I could over the time, but it was the mad rush at the beginning was based on death by polystyrene cement, basically, and producing the armies as quickly as I could to get them on the table, and that's fine. The fact that I've not used them for 5 years or so doesn't really matter. That I've got them, and I've since expanded with Poles who can fight the Swedes, but they're all metal, and Ottomans who can fight the Poles, they're all metal. Although these days you could probably get away with some plastics from for the irregular troops.
Sure.
So it's just been whatever's meets a need. I mean, when I decided I was going to do the sequels, which I did about 3 years ago, that was kicked off because there was a Kickstarter which I bought into when it came out in about 2012, and basically bought both sides, and then they sat in a box for like 8 years, and then they sort of rapidly got painted. I've mentioned before that I've got Warlord Russian Crimean figures to paint up. The majority of the figures I've got the 90% of the armies are metal. But if I want to build up the Russian army, which needs to be built up because it's got no chance of winning at the moment, then plastics is the way to go.
Sure. And
plastics lead for me anyway, allow much more in the way of conversion opportunities. If I was to do Napoleonics, which I've avoided since about 1980, I would go with plastics. And I do buy plastics where they can be used for my French Revolutionary Wars collection. And were I to go back into the AWI, I would get plastics.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you bring up Napoleonics, because they inevitably Napoleonics get mentioned in nearly every Masters interview I do at some point. And famously always talk about my terror of one day getting into them and facing the numbers. And I think I agree with you. I think my first instinct would be we're going plastic. The majority.
Well, you can do it. Yeah.
So just talk about we were talking before about batches and batch painting.
Yeah.
What is a batch to you? So what would you, if you were saying I'm going to paint a number of figures for a unit, and you're going to do, so for people that are a bit confused about what batch painting is, if you're starting out, batch painting is where you have a number of figures for a set unit or whatever, or a set army. And you build them all first if they're plastic, and you get them all ready if they're metal. And then you will paint them in batches by, say you're painting 40 dudes that are Napoleonics with blue coats. You get your blue paint and you paint the blue coat of 40, you paint 40 coats in blue, and then you do 40 sets of boots in black, etc. That's batch painting. So you're not switching between colours. You're just you're painting everything in all the colour of one colour in particular colour, and then so on and so forth. And thereby you create a form of production line of painting to get things done potentially quicker than doing them singularly. So to you, Colin, what is a batch? Oh, is it 10, 20?
Yeah, a unit.
A unit.
A unit or several if they're small units. But yeah, I mean, in my most of my collections of horse and musket, if you like, range, a unit can be between 24 and 48 figures depending on which particular period. And so I'll just prepare a unit. I'll probably prepare 2 or 3 units, to be honest. And then I'll do all the blues on one. And then not so much while they're drying, but in order to retain some sanity, I might then do all of the whites on another and all the flesh. So I just do it it's the nearest I get to being organised.
So you're rotating around the units while you're doing that. So you do all the blue on one unit, and then you'll go, go do something on another unit, by doing that you're painting different figures every time you're doing a colour.
I might also, as I've been doing recently, I've got Romans and Goths, some Renaissance figures, and some War of 1812 figures, Red Indians, and some French Revolutionary Wars figures. And I started them all off by doing, primed them all, stuck them on, put them on the lolly sticks, primed them all. And then I did the flesh for every single one of them, about 100 figures, across 4 different periods, half a dozen different units. And then that was an achievement. That was like one sitting, if you like. And then the next day I did all the metal, where people wearing armor. And then I was a bit more organized insofar as I would then go look at, I'll open this tin of paint or this jar of contrast paint, and anyone I think that needs to wear red, just do it. And then carry on that way. Obviously, it's easier where you've got people who all wear red or all wear blue or whatever uniform they might be wearing, because you get through them an awful lot quicker. But so for me, that's the batch painting idea.
And do you use lolly sticks? With sort of 4 or 5 on each stick, and go like that. And just getting down to the practical.
Both sides as well. I don't use both sides at the same time, but I mean, I don't chuck them away after one use. I flip them over and use them again because I'm meanie.
I see what you mean. Yeah. And do you? So they're on the lolly sticks, and is that blue tacked on? Is that how do you attach?
No, I just a little bit of glue, little Yoo-hoo normally.
Yeah, just PVA or
because it just pops.
Because they just pop up.
I don't know. I use just normal like Yoo-hoo or stick or something. Because it just pops off with a knife underneath. And I find that PVA, they don't necessarily stay on, or it takes too long to dry because I'm impatient. And I might go and obviously, if I'm depending on the size of the figure, there's certain stability issues when it comes to putting several of those on a stick. Horses as well, might do 50 or 60 horses in one go. But again, there might be 10 black ones, 10 brown ones, half a dozen this colour, that colour, and then you run out of ideas for colours, so you go back to more black ones. So, it's just the way I do it, and it's as I said, it's the nearest I get to being organised.
Are you someone that enjoys the painting side of it? Do you enjoy?
I hate it normally. I hate the first 99% of it. I like it when they're finished.
Yeah, the finishing touches.
That's actually a complete lie. I actually when I've got my mojo, you can't keep me away.
Right.
But if I don't have
for it, yeah.
when I don't have a mojo for it,
Yeah.
then wild horses wouldn't get me to do it. I'd be doing something else. Still hobby related, but I wouldn't be painting.
Yeah, building terrain or reading or planning something.
Yeah. Stick an MDF building together.
Yeah.
By way of punishment.
No,
that works. And usually I've got the mojo more than I've not, so that's fine.
Yeah. So bearing in mind that method, I mean, just to give, because I'm always curious about sort of speed. There's a couple of people I know. There's a friend of mine called Gareth Lane, who's a wargamer from Wales, who is famous for just unbelievable productivity. Just blink and he's just done an army in a couple of weeks, and they're just done and they look good, and he just churns. He's just unbelievably quick, and he batch paints. So I'm just curious to know, when you're sort of in full flow of a project, how many hours a day or a week do you think you're painting in batches like that, and how much time, and how long does it take you to complete a unit, say?
Well, as I said earlier, I rarely spend more than 20 minutes, half an hour at a time painting.
Yeah.
So I might have 2 or 3 of those sessions a day,
right?
Most days. And so it's really difficult to say how long it takes. They're done when they're done. Sometimes they take no time at all, it seems like.
It's pretty quite hard to keep track of how long it's actually taken, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, because I don't keep any records or anything.
You don't know, yeah.
I don't know, it doesn't matter.
That's interesting that you paint in sort of 20, 30-minute bursts. That's quite interesting as well. It's not a sit down.
It's purely because as I'm going to have to stand up and walk around in a minute. It's because I have to, if I sit in one position for too long,
you need to move.
I end up being in the same position when I try and get up. I tend to be bent over and stuck, so I need to keep moving a bit. Yeah. So actually, it's not so bad today, but and it works for me. So maybe it's an hour, 2 hours a day, but every day, and when I want to, really. Some days I'll do longer, or I'll do more sessions. But mainly, if I've got things I want to get finished for a game, or I've got a game coming up, or I want to start something else, and so it's just whatever I feel like, basically. There's absolutely no rhyme or reason to it.
Last few questions then. So, I mean, do you, as somebody who spent so long in the hobby and has achieved so much collection-wise and game-wise, as you sort of approach what would have been retirement age, do you give much thought to where the hobby is going in sort of 20, 30 years, and how my generation will tackle it, and my son's generation will tackle it?
On that. Yeah. Well, I'm confident that it will carry on, and I'm also confident that it will carry on in much the same way as it is now. Really, I mean, it was essentially a hobby that was kind of started, wasn't it, by older blokes back in the day, and my sort of the people I game with tend to age around the sort of 40s through to the 60s, and so the people who are in the 40s will still be doing it when I'm 80, or dead. So it's just, I just think it'll just progress as normal. I don't think there'll be any. I mean, we could say that the vast majority of people that are wargamers now are in their sort of twilight years, perhaps, and therefore when we're all gone, it's a greying hobby, so there'll be no one left to do it. But I just don't think that'll be.
You don't think that's true? No, I don't think.
I mean, it may be true, but I have no desire and no faith in it being what's going to happen.
Do you think we'd lose something if that did happen? I'm not saying that it is. I don't think. I agree with you. I think that there's all sorts of ways that people will find it. So like not many people find out how I did, but I think that there are so many other ways that people will come across it. So, for example, during lockdown, I've probably met over a dozen people that I've now got some sort of wargaming friendship or relationship of some kind with. And I've met some of them in person when restrictions have eased, but some of them I've never met. But we will meet at some point, but we've become friends through the internet. And on the flip side of that, there are people that have not loads, but a significant number, a good handful of people that have watched the YouTube channel that I've set up in lockdown. And then they leave comments on my videos saying, could you just give me a bit of advice? I'm just starting out, which is great. I think it's proof that things like YouTube will always give a shop window, if that's the right word, to the hobby.
I think so these days, yeah.
Where we don't have a physical shop window anymore. Which I do think, by the way, is a huge shame, and I think, but I accept is inevitable in some ways. That the war game shop with the informal games room that you spoke of in your childhood doesn't really exist anymore. Not in any sort of regular way. So you'd have to drive a long way even from here to find that, really.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm not aware of any around here either.
Yeah, I mean, Warlord have got a shop, and so Foundry, but they're not club-like shops. Really, they are shops that just sell their own products. Yeah. And they're not. So
well, I think social media. I think social media and sort of the technology that we're all blessed with now has been great, and certainly during lockdown, it's been fantastic. And I mean, I mentioned earlier that. I mean, it wasn't my idea to do it, but another friend of mine who did the first one. We started using video cameras and streaming on YouTube the video, whilst we use Skype or Zoom for the actual audio, and we'd have people from all over the place, including my mate Mark in Australia, playing games using the internet and. Playing the games live, which is brilliant. It's something that was, when I started, would never have even been a twinkle in somebody's eye, let alone, and we all, got Mr. Berners-Lee to thank for that, haven't we? Yeah. Because I mean, I've actually benefited a lot from lockdown as well. In my circle of friends has really widened because I'm now in regular communication with people in the States, Australia, all over in Scotland, all over the place. Just because we've all got the same sort of interest in the same hobby, and there was a means by which we could all. Every Saturday at 4:30, we have an hour and a half or so, just chattering on a chat room on Zoom,
on a call. Yeah. I think one of my favourite moments was it's probably only a few weeks ago, actually, a month or two ago. I was part of an event that myself and Gareth I say organised, but we put together this plan where. A load of people would play the Wars of Roses games on the same day, and in different countries. And we had this lovely moment on the Sunday where we had a Zoom call with something like 20 people in Vancouver, who, not long after we'd finished our game, were just starting a whopping great Battle of Towson game. And we just Zoom called because they were outdoors as well, because they still have to play outdoors because of restrictions. So we're just Zooming from somebody's Canadian garden, talking about wargaming and beer for 20 minutes.
Yes.
With people who would otherwise never have spoken to, were it not for lockdown, ironically.
Yeah.
So that was good.
Yeah, and it may well be that because people who are more your age than my age are more au fait with technology, that'll be a way of sustaining the hobby in different ways. I mean,
that's
who knows? who knows what's going to happen regarding lockdown and
it's true.
being able to get.
Yeah, it's a good point actually. Yeah, because pretty much everybody my age and younger has grown up with the internet.
Yeah.
So you've never not known how to use it. If you know, it's never not been.
Yeah.
So even when I was 16 at college, was just when you were getting computers with the internet on. You know.
Yeah.
In schools, so it was common when I was a teenager to have at least a bank of computers in the library that had the internet.
Yeah.
And then of course it went nuts from there pretty quick. So yeah, that's true actually. We have got a generation coming through now that at my age that will use it, I suppose.
I mean, when I was hosting the remote games, and possibly still in the future we'll do as well. I mean, one of my part of my room, it looks a bit like GCHQ. There's that many computers, computer monitors, and everything, and cameras, various different angles.
Yeah, you have a lot of screens, don't you? Yeah, it's little screens everywhere.
Yeah, and but yes, it's adapting to technology and change and everything.
Yeah.
What we need next is General Jumbo from the Beano and his radio-controlled army.
I remember that. Yeah, I did.
Yes. Yeah, that'll be the next thing. Self-painting figures.
Tiny robotic figures would be amazing.
Yeah. Who can change their own uniforms. Yes.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, you could just with a little wardrobe that they can just go in and.
Yes.
That would be good.
So then we think we're playing with dolls. Yes.
Yeah, then it will get. Then the jokes will get even more harsh. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, last thing then. I mean, if you were to, I mean, you had a fantastic, I'd say retirement. You're not even at retirement age yet, but you know you've had a really productive few years, and you've achieved so much. You know, with the collection and the blog. By the way, carryings on up the Dale. If you've not read it, at the end of this, go and look it up. It's a fantastic resource and something to look at and inspire you. So Colin, I mean, what if there's anybody listening to this who's starting out, or maybe they're a year in and they're sort of lacking in motivation? What would you say to them to either encourage them to start or to keep going?
I would simply say that if you keep the fires of your interest going, and you're not going to be able to amass massive armies when you're in your 20s or 30s or even in your 40s, but as time progresses and you grow with the hobby, then ultimately you will possibly, if you want to, be able to have a fantastic setup with as many figures and collections as you could ever hope to have. But obviously it doesn't come without I wouldn't say it doesn't come without a price, but I mean, you've got to work at it, and it's like any hobby, you get out of it what you put in. If I was a golfer, then walking around a golf links 2 or 3 times a week would be fantastic. But painting wargames figures and having a game every couple of weeks or every week is my equivalent of that, and it's you've got to start somewhere. You might have a handicap, as you would with golf at the beginning, but you just carry on and you get better and you have more resources. Hopefully you have more resources. And as you move on into dotage, get to the point where you can't quite remember what it is that you've got or why it's there.
Yeah, it's funny. The conversation with Ken Riley, Yorkshire gamer.
Yeah,
I've done a podcast interview with. He was my first Masters interview, I think, Ken. And I posed the question to him: how many figures have you got? And he was like, "Do you know what? I've never, ever counted them." And yeah, he just simply did not know. He just had no idea.
Well, I only know roughly, give or take, following a conversation with Ken, and after finding an app somewhere on the internet where I could actually catalogue my collections and give them a value for insurance purposes, and I stopped because it was frightening.
It was starting.
I don't have that many. Yeah, I have probably less than 30,000 figures.
Okay. Yeah.
I definitely have less than 30,000 figures.
You definitely have less than 30.
In 28 mil. Yeah.
Can't remember what Ken's final total was. I think it was a little bit more than that, but he was certainly a bit shocked to discover it.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah. But it's yeah. And it's of absolutely no value to 99% of the population of the world.
Yeah, it's only valuable to other war games. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's relatively irrelevant. Yeah.
And my stuff it's nicely painted, but it's not showcase painted. It's just war game standard painted, because that's all I've ever needed or wanted.
Yeah, which by the way, for people that are trying to build a collection, is the sensible way to do it. Is not to try and paint every one of those 2,000 figures like they're going to win an award, because you will never ever finish.
No.
Yeah.
Well, that's where contrast paints may be a gimmick, but contrast paints do help.
Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah, it might be something I experiment with in future for sure. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I hope that was interesting and useful.
It was. Thank you very much, Colin. We'll say cheerio. That was Colin Ashton, everybody. Carrying on up and down as a blog. Get on there, have a look. But for now, thank you very much, Colin, for your time.
Pleasure.
And we hope to speak to you again soon with some specials. We've got planned around mental health and war games in future. We've got some special Masters interviews coming up, and we might invite you back for one of those. But for now,
that'd be really good. Yeah.
Cheers.
Okay. Thank you.